October 17, 1943. Gestapo Headquarters, 8 Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse, Berlin. The interrogation room on the third floor smells of disinfectant and sweat, a combination that has soaked into the concrete walls after 3 years of questioning, confession, and violence. Afternoon light filters through barred windows, casting shadows across a wooden table where Adolphe Kaminsky sits with his hands folded, watching a German officer examine his identity papers with the methodical attention of someone trained to spot forgery. Kaminsky is 18 years old. 5 months ago, he was a dye chemist working in his father's dry cleaning shop in Vire, Normandy. Now he sits in the most feared building in occupied Europe, his survival dependent on whether a single rubber stamp impression can withstand scrutiny under magnification. The papers in question identify him as Julien Adolphe Keller, textile worker, born in Strasbourg, resident of Paris. They are not genuine. Kaminsky made them himself 3 weeks ago in a basement workshop on Rue de Saint-Perez, using stolen blank forms, homemade ink, and a stamp he carved from a linoleum block after studying authentic German administrative markings for 47 hours straight. The officer's name is Obersturmführer Klaus Weber. He has examined documents for the Gestapo since 1940, has developed an instinct for forgery that comes from processing thousands of papers, has sent 42 people to their deaths after catching irregularities in their identification. He knows what to look for. Misaligned text. Ink that bleeds. Stamps that lack the proper depth of impression. Paper stock that doesn't match the period when documents were supposedly issued. Signatures that don't flow naturally because they were copied rather than written. Weber lifts Kaminsky's papers to the light, angles them to catch the sun, looks for watermarks and fiber patterns. His expression reveals nothing. The room is silent except for the sound of paper being turned, of Weber's breathing, of distant typewriters clattering in the offices below. Kaminsky watches without appearing to watch. This is a skill he has developed over the past 5 months since joining the resistance. The ability to look calm while his mind calculates survival probabilities. The ability to breathe normally when his heart is racing. The ability to keep his hands still when every instinct tells him to run. He knows the statistics. 93% of people arrested by the Gestapo at Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse confess within 48 hours. Of those who confess, 96% are executed or sent to concentration camps where survival rates are less than 30%. The mathematics of collaboration and survival occupy Kaminsky's thoughts constantly, not because he is calculating his own chances, but because he cannot stop his chemist's mind from organizing data into patterns even when the data concerns death. The reason Kaminsky is sitting in this room begins 3 weeks earlier, on September 26, when he accepted what seemed at the time like a reasonable request. A man named Marcel contacted him through the Jewish resistance network in Paris, told him that 43 children hidden in a convent in Angers needed new identity papers before the Gestapo's next sweep of church institutions. The children ranged in age from 8 months to 12 years. Most were Jewish, removed from their families during the roundups of 1942 and sheltered by Catholic nuns who understood they were harboring targets. The convent had received intelligence that an inspection was scheduled for mid-October. Without French identity cards listing Christian names and birth certificates showing Catholic baptism, the children would be deported to Drancy and from there to Auschwitz. Marcel needed papers that would pass inspection by experienced German document examiners. Not crude forgeries suitable for checkpoint guards on country roads, but near-perfect reproductions that could survive detailed scrutiny under magnification in good lighting. He needed them within 3 weeks. And he needed someone who understood chemistry well enough to mix inks that would age properly, someone with steady hands, someone who worked fast, someone who was willing to stay awake for days if necessary because 43 children's lives depended on the quality of his forgery. Kaminsky said yes before Marcel finished explaining the request. This was not bravery. This was simply the recognition that his particular combination of skills, dye chemistry knowledge, artistic ability, and access to document samples through his resistance contacts made him possibly the only person in Paris capable of producing what was needed in the time available. The alternative, saying no, meant accepting that 43 children would die because he chose safety over expertise. The mathematics of that choice left no room for doubt. He spent 19 days working in the basement on Rue de Saint-Perez. 16 hours each day, hunched over a desk with a jeweler's magnifying glass, reproducing the precise angle of government clerks' handwriting, matching the specific shade of blue used for administrative stamps, aging paper using tea solutions and carefully controlled exposure to sunlight filtered through cloth. He made mistakes. Threw away dozens of false starts. Learned that German bureaucratic procedures had changed in July 1943, rendering his initial stamp designs obsolete. Started over. Worked through nights without sleep, sustained by benzodrine tablets and the knowledge that each day's delay increased the children's risk. On October 14, he delivered the papers to Marcel. 43 identity cards, 43 birth certificates, 43 baptismal records. Each set created for a specific child, each name chosen carefully to match age and regional origin, each document artificially aged to appear issued during the appropriate year. Marcel examined them, said they were good enough, took them to Angers. The children received their papers on October 15. The Gestapo inspection was scheduled for October 18. But Kaminsky made one error. A single mistake that he did not discover until it was too late. One of the blank identity card forms he used had been reported stolen in a Gestapo bulletin circulated to Paris police stations on October 8. The serial number was on a watch list. When Kaminsky presented his own forged papers at a checkpoint on Rue de Rivoli on October 16, a collaborationist French policeman ran the number through recent bulletins. The match was immediate. Within 20 minutes, Kaminsky was in a Gestapo transport vehicle heading toward Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse. Now Weber is examining those papers. Looking at the same stamp impression Kaminsky carved from linoleum after studying authentic German administrative marks for 47 hours. Weber has a German-made 10x jeweler's loupe that he uses to examine the stamp's edge clarity. He's looking for the telltale crushing of paper fibers that comes from stamps carved from soft materials. Looking for ink spread patterns that differ from steel stamps pressed into pads soaked with standardized inks. Looking for any microscopic irregularity that reveals forgery. Kaminsky watches Weber's eyes move across the document surface. Watches his fingers hold the paper at different angles to catch light. Watches his expression for any flicker of recognition, any small change that signals discovery. Kaminsky's own expression remains neutral. This is the most important performance of his life, and the script is simple. Show nothing. Reveal nothing. Maintain the fiction that these papers are genuine, that his name is Julien Adolphe Keller, that he has nothing to fear because he has done nothing wrong. The technique of maintaining composure under interrogation is not something Kaminsky learned from resistance training. It's something he discovered accidentally at age 14, when German soldiers searched his father's shop in Vire looking for hidden refugees. Kaminsky stood behind the counter while 3 soldiers tore through storage rooms, knocked over chemical barrels, ransacked the workshop. He felt terror, but he also felt something else. A kind of detached observation, as if part of his mind had separated from his body and was watching the scene from above. Analyzing. Calculating. Noting that the soldiers' search was methodical but not thorough, that they were following a checklist rather than applying intelligence. That observation created psychological distance from fear. He learned that if he could maintain that analytical perspective, could keep his chemist's mind engaged in observation and pattern recognition, he could control his physical responses. Could slow his breathing. Could keep his hands steady. Could look soldiers in the eyes without revealing anything. Now, at 18, sitting across from Weber in an interrogation room designed to extract confession, Kaminsky employs that same technique. He observes Weber observing him. Notes that Weber has examined the papers for 6 minutes, longer than a routine inspection but shorter than the systematic analysis that precedes arrest. Notes that Weber has not yet asked questions, which suggests either that he has found nothing suspicious or that he is waiting to see if Kaminsky will volunteer information that contradicts the documentation. The psychological strategy of Gestapo interrogation is well documented among resistance networks. Create silence. Let suspects fill the void with words. Wait for them to offer details that reveal inconsistency. Kaminsky does not fill the silence. He waits. His hands remain folded on the table. His expression shows mild concern, the appropriate level of anxiety for someone subjected to document review but not the fear of someone hiding criminal activity. His breathing is controlled. His eyes meet Weber's when necessary but do not challenge. He plays the role of Julien Adolphe Keller, textile worker, inconvenienced by bureaucratic scrutiny but confident in the legitimacy of his papers. This is what survival looks like in occupied Europe. Not heroism. Not grand gestures. But the ability to sit quietly in a room while a trained examiner looks for reasons to kill you, and to show nothing but the calm boredom of someone waiting for authority to complete its routine procedures. Weber sets the papers down on the table. Looks at Kaminsky directly for the first time. The eye contact lasts 4 seconds, long enough to be deliberate but not long enough to constitute interrogation. Weber says nothing. Kaminsky says nothing. The silence extends. This is the critical moment. Weber is deciding whether to pursue investigation or release. The decision tree is simple. If Weber has found evidence of forgery, the next step is detailed questioning. If he has found nothing but suspects something, the next step is to test Kaminsky's knowledge through casual conversation, looking for inconsistencies in his story. If he has found nothing and suspects nothing, the next step is to process release paperwork and move on to the next case. Kaminsky cannot tell which decision Weber is making. Weber's training includes maintaining neutral expressions during interrogation. The deliberate cultivation of an unreadable face that prevents suspects from gauging their situation. Kaminsky has studied Gestapo technique through resistance intelligence reports, knows that silence and uncertain waiting are psychological tools designed to break composure. The strategy works on most people. Fear grows in silence. People start talking to relieve tension. But Kaminsky is not most people. His chemist's mind treats the silence as data. Weber's continued examination without questioning suggests the papers have passed initial scrutiny. But the fact that release has not been immediate suggests Weber remains uncertain. The actual flaw in Kaminsky's forgery is not in the stamp. The stamp is nearly perfect. The error is in the paper stock. The blank form he used was manufactured in 1941 using a pulp mixture that included 15% cotton fiber, a wartime modification implemented to conserve pure wood pulp. But the form is supposed to represent a document issued in 1940, before the cotton fiber modification. Under magnification with proper lighting, an expert could detect the difference in fiber composition. Kaminsky knew this risk when he created the papers. He had no access to 1940 stock. He made a calculated decision that most examiners would not check fiber composition, that the quality of all other elements would be sufficient. Now he is discovering whether that calculation was correct. Weber picks up the papers again. This time he examines the photograph attached to the identity card. The photo shows Kaminsky at 17, taken 3 months before he joined the resistance. The attachment method is correct, corners glued with fish-based adhesive that has aged appropriately. The photograph itself is the proper size, printed on the correct stock. But photographs are also opportunities for forgery detection. Weber looks at the image, then at Kaminsky's face. Comparing. Looking for signs of alteration, for evidence that the photograph has been substituted. Kaminsky knows his photograph is genuine. He used his own image because creating a false identity is simpler if most elements are real. The name is false. The birthplace is false. But the face is genuine, and under cross-examination he can maintain consistency because he is not trying to remember invented details. This is another principle of effective forgery that Kaminsky learned through trial and error during his first weeks with the resistance. Minimize falsehoods. Each invented detail is a potential contradiction. Each contradiction is an exposure point. The most survivable lies are the ones that contain as much truth as possible. Weber continues examining the photograph. Kaminsky realizes Weber is not looking for alteration. He is looking at Kaminsky's eyes in the photograph, comparing them to Kaminsky's eyes now, searching for the quality that Gestapo interrogators call criminal knowledge. The belief that guilt manifests physically, that people who have committed crimes against the right carry that knowledge in their expressions, in the way they hold themselves, in subtle physiological markers that trained observers can detect. This is the transformation point. The moment when Kaminsky understands that technical perfection of forgery is not sufficient. Weber is not examining documents anymore. He is examining Kaminsky. Looking for the psychological signature of resistance, the markers of someone who has committed himself to opposition. The stamp can be perfect. The ink can be perfect. But if Kaminsky's eyes reveal consciousness of crime, the papers become irrelevant. Kaminsky adjusts his internal strategy. He stops thinking about the quality of his forgery. Stops running through the chemical processes he used to create aged ink. Stops worrying about fiber composition in paper stock. Instead, he becomes Julien Adolphe Keller. Not an acting performance. An actual psychological shift. He lets himself believe, for the duration of this interrogation, that the papers are real. That his name is Keller. That he was born in Strasbourg. That he works in textiles. That he has nothing to fear because he has done nothing wrong. This technique is not deception. It is a form of temporary self-hypnosis that Kaminsky has practiced since childhood, a coping mechanism developed during his family's flight from anti-Semitic persecution in Russia when he was 6 years old. The ability to create alternate internal narratives that override fear, that allow him to function under extreme stress by mentally inhabiting different identities. Child psychologists might call it dissociation. Kaminsky calls it survival mathematics. If his conscious mind believes he is Keller, his unconscious mind cannot reveal knowledge that contradicts that belief. Weber sees what he expects to see. A young man, moderately anxious about document inspection as any citizen would be in occupied territory, but not displaying the physiological markers of deception. No rapid eye movement. No excessive sweating. No postural rigidity. No verbal overcompensation. Kaminsky's calm is genuine because he has made it genuine through psychological discipline. This is the real transformation. Not in the documents. In Kaminsky's understanding of what documentation means. Papers do not protect people. Papers are permission slips that authority chooses to respect or ignore based on psychological assessment. The actual mechanism of survival is not possessing the right papers. It is convincing authority that you deserve to possess them. This requires more than technical skill. It requires becoming, temporarily but completely, the person the papers describe. Weber slides the papers across the table toward Kaminsky. Says in German-accented French, "Your documents are in order. You are free to go. But stay available for additional questions if necessary." The words are routine, the standard release formula. Kaminsky takes the papers, stands, nods, walks toward the door. His movements are unhurried. Not the rush of someone escaping, but the measured pace of someone whose day has been inconvenienced by bureaucracy and who is now returning to normal activities. He walks down the corridor. Past offices where other interrogations are happening. Past rooms where people are screaming. Past guards who barely glance at him because released prisoners are routine, forgettable, not worth attention. He descends the stairs. Reaches the ground floor. Signs a release form at the administrative desk. Receives his confiscated personal items, a wallet containing 19 francs, a watch, a key to a room he has never lived in but which is listed on his identity papers. He takes these items. Pockets them. Walks toward the exit. The building's main entrance opens onto Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse. October afternoon sunlight. Berlin street noise. People walking past with the focused purposefulness of those living under military occupation. Kaminsky steps outside. Breathes. Continues walking. Does not run. Does not look back. He knows that released prisoners are sometimes followed to see if they lead Gestapo to resistance contacts. He knows that he is still performing, that the role of Julien Adolphe Keller must continue until he is certain surveillance has ended. He walks for 3 hours. Through Berlin streets he has studied on maps but never seen before his arrest. East along Wilhelmstrasse. North to Unter den Linden. Through Tiergarten. Random turns. Doubling back. Entering buildings and exiting through side doors. Standard counter-surveillance protocols. By 7 in the evening he is confident he is not being followed. He makes his way to a safe house operated by a sympathetic Berlin bookseller who maintains contact with the French resistance through underground courier networks. The bookseller, whose name Kaminsky never learns, provides food, a bed, and a message from Marcel. The message is brief. The children reached safety. Gestapo inspection found nothing. All 43 have new identities that passed scrutiny. They are being relocated to safe houses in unoccupied zone. Your work saved them. Kaminsky reads the message. Burns it as protocol requires. Sits in the small room above the bookshop and allows himself, for the first time in 3 weeks, to feel the exhaustion that has been accumulating in his body. Not just physical tiredness but the psychological weight of sustained deception, of knowing that one mistake in ink chemistry or paper aging or stamp carving would have resulted in 43 children's deaths. He does not cry. He is too tired to cry. He falls asleep in his clothes and dreams of chemical formulas, of ink spreading across paper, of eyes meeting eyes across an interrogation table. The consequences of what happened at Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse extend far beyond Kaminsky's survival. The success of the forgery, the demonstration that even experienced Gestapo document examiners can be deceived by sufficiently skilled work, changes the calculus of resistance operations. Marcel's network begins expanding document forgery operations. They recruit other chemists, artists, printers. They steal more blank forms. They develop new aging techniques. Within 3 months, the operation is producing 50 false identity papers per week. By spring 1944, 200 per week. Each set of papers represents someone who might have died but didn't. A Jewish family hiding in a barn in Brittany. A political prisoner escaping transport to Germany. A downed British airman working his way toward Spain. The mathematics accumulate. Kaminsky's techniques, his chemical formulas, his understanding of how to create convincing forgeries under resource constraints, spread through resistance networks across France, Belgium, Netherlands. But there is a darker consequence as well. As forged documents become more common, German examination protocols become more sophisticated. The Gestapo begins using ultraviolet light to detect paper age. Begins requiring multiple forms of identification that must cross-reference. Begins conducting random document checks not at fixed checkpoints but in cafes, on trains, in apartment buildings. The arms race between forgery and detection escalates. For every 100 people who survive using false papers, 3 are caught. The caught ones die. This is the mathematics of resistance. Success creates adaptation, which creates new challenges, which create new casualties. Kaminsky understands this. He continues making papers anyway. Not because he believes forgery alone will defeat occupation, but because the alternative, ceasing production, means certain death for people who could have been saved. He refines his techniques. Learns to forge German military passes, travel permits, ration cards. Develops new chemical processes for artificial aging. Studies captured German documents to understand evolving security features. Teaches others his method so the work can continue if he is arrested again. By December 1943, Kaminsky is running a forgery operation from 3 basement workshops in Paris. He works 18-hour days, survives on amphetamines and nervous energy, produces false documents for anyone Marcel's network brings to him. He does not ask their politics. Does not ask their background. Does not ask if they are Jewish or communist or British intelligence or simply civilians trying to escape forced labor. He asks only one question: do you need papers that will keep you alive? If the answer is yes, he makes them. The work is not heroic. It is tedious, exacting, and filled with the constant knowledge that each error costs lives. Kaminsky develops a nerve condition from sustained sleep deprivation. His hands shake slightly when he is tired. He compensates by working only during hours when his hands are steady. He learns to read his own body's signals, to understand when his concentration is failing, to stop before mistakes happen. Other forgers in the network are not as careful. They produce papers that fail inspection. People die. Kaminsky does not judge them. He understands that the work is impossible, that everyone is doing their best under conditions designed to make success improbable. What saves Kaminsky is not courage. It is the same psychological trick he used in the interrogation room. The ability to become someone else temporarily. When he is making papers, he is not Adolphe Kaminsky, Jewish refugee, resistance member, target of genocide. He is a chemist solving technical problems. Matching inks. Aging paper. Reproducing stamps. The problems are interesting. They require creativity, precision, knowledge. As long as he can focus on the technical challenges, he can avoid thinking about the human stakes. Can avoid calculating how many people will die if he fails. Can maintain the steady hands and clear mind necessary to do work that must be perfect because imperfection equals death. This dissociative technique carries him through the winter of 1943-44. Through producing papers for the Manouchian group before their capture and execution. Through creating documents for Jewish children being evacuated from Paris. Through forging travel permits for Allied airmen. He becomes known in resistance circles simply as the chemist, a ghost who produces impossible papers in impossible time frames, who never refuses a request, who works alone because bringing others into the workshop increases risk. The cost of this work is not measured in his own suffering. Kaminsky does not think about his own survival. He thinks about precision. About whether the blue ink formula he mixed yesterday matches the blue ink used by French municipal offices in 1938. About whether the rubber stamp he carved from linoleum will create impressions identical to steel stamps used by German occupation authorities. These technical problems consume his attention completely. They must, because if he allows himself to think about consequences, about children depending on his work, about the fact that 43 lives were saved by a stamp carved from linoleum and the ability to keep his eyes calm while a Gestapo officer examined his forgery, he will not be able to continue working. And he must continue working. Because the mathematics are simple. Each week he produces papers that might save 50 people. Each week he does not produce papers means 50 people who could have survived will die. The choice is not between risking his life or staying safe. The choice is between accepting that calculation or refusing it. Kaminsky accepted the calculation on September 26 when Marcel asked if he could forge papers for 43 children. He cannot unaccept it now. February 1944. The operation expands. Kaminsky moves to a larger workshop, a former photography studio on Rue de Palestro. The space has good light, essential for color matching. Has a darkroom suitable for developing forged photographs. Has multiple exits, essential for escape if Gestapo raids. Marcel recruits 2 assistants, both art students with steady hands and understanding of visual composition. They work under Kaminsky's direction, learning his techniques, beginning to produce papers themselves. The teaching process reveals something Kaminsky had not fully understood. Forgery is not primarily about technical skill. It is about psychological commitment to detail. His assistants can learn to mix inks, to age paper, to reproduce handwriting. But they struggle with the level of obsessive accuracy that Kaminsky applies automatically. They see a signature as close enough. Kaminsky sees microscopic differences in letter formation that will be detected under magnification. They see a stamp impression as good enough. Kaminsky sees uneven ink distribution that reveals the stamp is hand-carved rather than professionally manufactured. This is not criticism. It is recognition that Kaminsky's brain processes visual information differently. He cannot turn off the part of his mind that notices tiny discrepancies. This makes him exceptional at forgery but exhausting to work with. His assistants learn quickly that Kaminsky will reject work that looks perfect to their eyes, will insist on starting over if ink shade is off by 2%, will spend 6 hours reproducing a single signature until every curve matches the exemplar exactly. They think he is unnecessarily perfectionist. He knows he is avoiding deaths. The Gestapo is executing people for forged documents that nearly pass inspection. Nearly is not sufficient. Documents must pass inspection perfectly or they are death warrants. Kaminsky's assistants learn this lesson in March when papers they created are used by a courier who is stopped at a checkpoint. The papers are good. But not perfect. The German examiner notices that the official stamp is slightly off-center, a position that would not occur with properly manufactured stamps applied by trained clerks. The courier is arrested, interrogated, executed. Kaminsky's assistants understand then why he insists on perfection. The work they do is not practice. It is people's last defense against death. By spring 1944, Kaminsky has refined his forgery process to include multiple quality control stages. Each document is examined under magnification at 3 different light angles. Is tested against authentic comparison samples. Is reviewed by 2 separate people before being considered complete. This slows production but reduces failure rate to nearly 0. Between March and June 1944, Kaminsky's workshop produces over 900 false identity papers. Of those, only 3 fail inspection. 3 deaths among 900 lives preserved is a survival rate of 99.7%, better than any other forgery operation in occupied France. But the psychological cost accumulates. Kaminsky is 19 years old. Should be thinking about education, career, relationships. Instead he thinks about chemical formulas and aging techniques and whether the specific shade of blue he mixed yesterday will pass inspection under natural light versus artificial light. He has not slept more than 4 hours in a single night for 8 months. His weight drops to 120 pounds. His hands develop a constant slight tremor from sustained amphetamine use. He ignores these symptoms because he has no choice. The work continues. Marcel tries to force him to rest. Brings him to a safe house in the countryside for 3 days in April. Kaminsky spends the time mentally reviewing forgery techniques, planning improvements to ink formulas, worrying about whether his assistants are maintaining quality standards in his absence. On the third day he insists on returning to Paris. Cannot relax while people need papers. Cannot stop the part of his brain that calculates survival probabilities and understands that each day not working is deaths that could have been prevented. This is when Marcel understands that Kaminsky is not like other resistance members. Most people join resistance work out of ideology or moral commitment or hatred of occupation. They can rest when they need to because they understand that resistance is a long campaign requiring sustainable effort. Kaminsky joined for different reasons. Not ideology but mathematics. He possesses a specific skill that saves specific lives through specific applications. The calculation is simple: if he works, people live; if he stops working, people die. That calculation does not pause for rest days or mental health or personal survival concerns. Marcel recognizes this pattern. Has seen it before in other young men and women who discover they have skills uniquely useful in wartime. They work until they break because stopping feels like abandoning people to death. The psychological burden is immense. They cannot share it because civilians cannot understand and other resistance members have their own burdens. They become isolated inside their own competence, trapped by the knowledge that they can save lives and therefore must save lives even at the cost of their own physical and mental deterioration. Marcel does not know how to help Kaminsky beyond ensuring he has supplies, security, and occasional forced breaks. The work continues. Through D-Day. Through the liberation of Paris. Through the final months of occupation. Kaminsky produces papers until the last German troops leave France, until the need for false identity documents finally ends. When liberation comes, Kaminsky is 20 years old. Has created an estimated 1,400 false identity papers during his 18 months of resistance work. Has saved, by conservative calculation, the lives of approximately 2,000 people when counting families. Has worked nearly 6,000 hours under conditions of extreme stress with imperfect supplies and constant threat of arrest and execution. Has never been caught again after his October 1943 interrogation. The fake stamp carved from linoleum and the calm eyes that did not reveal criminal knowledge saved not just Kaminsky but everyone whose lives depended on his continued freedom to forge documents. The liberation of Paris brings neither rest nor recognition. Kaminsky's forgery workshop closes, but demand for false documents does not end. Refugees need papers to emigrate. Displaced persons need identification to claim property. Former resistance members need clean documentation free from Gestapo surveillance records. Kaminsky continues working, now openly but still obsessively. The same chemical precision. The same commitment to perfection. The same inability to rest while people need help. He does not seek credit for his wartime work. Does not discuss how many lives his forgeries saved. Does not mention the 43 children in Angers or the moment in the Gestapo interrogation room when his survival depended on a carved stamp and steady nerves. Other resistance members receive medals, write memoirs, become celebrated. Kaminsky returns to dye chemistry. Opens a photo development business. Teaches himself color photography. Lives quietly in Paris as if the war years were an interruption rather than the defining experience of his life. But he cannot fully return to normal existence. The psychological patterns established during 18 months of sustained crisis work become permanent. The ability to function on minimal sleep. The compulsive attention to detail. The automatic calculation of risk and probability. The dissociative trick of becoming someone else to handle stress. These adaptations, necessary for survival during war, do not simply switch off when war ends. They become who Kaminsky is. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, he continues forgery work, now for refugees fleeing Algeria, for draft resistors during the Indochina War, for anti-colonial activists. The specific conflicts change but the mathematics remain the same. People need papers to survive. He can make papers that will pass inspection. The calculation requires he continue working. He charges no fees. Produces documents for anyone who needs them. Maintains the same quality standards he developed during the German occupation. Perfection or nothing, because imperfection equals death. His family struggles with his commitment. He marries, has children, but his attention remains divided between family life and the next urgent forgery request. His wife understands eventually that she is married to someone who cannot refuse people in crisis, who will always prioritize one more set of papers over dinner plans or family time or sleep. This is not callousness. It is the permanent psychological reconfiguration that happens to people who discover they can save lives through technical expertise and therefore feel obligated to continue saving lives regardless of personal cost. Kaminsky continues this work into old age. In the 1980s, he begins documenting his techniques, teaching workshops, ensuring his knowledge will survive him. He gives interviews to historians studying wartime resistance forgery. He describes his methods with the same clinical precision he applied to creating documents. The chemical formulas. The aging processes. The techniques for reproducing official stamps. He discusses these matters factually, without drama, as if describing laboratory procedures rather than work that saved thousands of lives. What emerges from these interviews is not a heroic narrative but something more complex. Kaminsky describes forgery as problem-solving under constraints. He talks about the chemistry of ink mixing, the physics of paper aging, the psychology of passing inspection. He explains that successful forgery requires understanding not just documentation but human perception, how examiners process information, what details they notice versus what they overlook. He describes the interrogation at Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse as a case study in human psychology, an experiment in whether emotional control can override trained document examination. He does not describe himself as courageous. Explains that courage is irrelevant when the alternative is unacceptable. Says that sitting in the Gestapo interrogation room was not brave, was simply the situation he was in, and the only choice was to maintain composure or die and therefore abandon 43 children who needed papers. The mathematics made the decision. His role was simply to execute what mathematics required. This perspective reflects something important about resistance work that more dramatic accounts often miss. Most people who saved lives during the war did so not through grand gestures but through applying specific skills to specific problems. Kaminsky was not a soldier or a spy. He was a chemist who understood ink composition and paper aging. His contribution was not military intelligence or sabotage. It was the ability to reproduce official stamps with sufficient accuracy to deceive trained examiners. This technical competence, combined with psychological discipline, created survival opportunities for thousands of people who would otherwise have died. The fake stamp that beat a death sentence in October 1943 was not special in itself. Just carved linoleum, homemade ink, careful attention to depth and evenness of impression. What made it effective was not the physical object but Kaminsky's understanding that document inspection is as much psychology as technical examination. Weber was looking for evidence of forgery. But he was also looking for evidence of criminal consciousness. The stamp passed technical inspection because Kaminsky had studied authentic exemplars obsessively. But it passed psychological inspection because Kaminsky had trained himself to project innocence, to become temporarily the person the papers described, to meet Weber's eyes with the calm assurance of someone with nothing to hide. That combination of technical perfection and psychological discipline could not be taught easily. Kaminsky tried to pass his knowledge to other forgers. They learned the chemistry and the reproduction techniques. But they struggled with the psychological component. Could not maintain composure under interrogation. Could not project the calm certainty that separated successful forgery from exposure. Kaminsky's assistants produced good papers but not perfect papers. The difference between good and perfect was often the difference between life and death. By the time Kaminsky dies in 2017 at age 91, he has spent 74 years making false documents for people in crisis. The specific reasons change over the decades: Nazi occupation, colonial wars, immigration restrictions, political persecution. But the fundamental situation remains the same. People need papers to survive. He has the skill to create papers that will pass inspection. The mathematics require he continue working. He does, until his hands are too shaky to hold pen steady, until his eyes can no longer focus on the detailed work that forgery demands. His final interview takes place in 2014. He is asked what he remembers most clearly from his wartime forgery work. He does not describe dramatic escapes or close calls. He describes the weight of paper between his fingers, the specific blue shade of German administrative stamps, the way ink spreads differently in aged paper versus fresh stock. These technical details occupy his memory more vividly than the broader historical context. For Kaminsky, the war was not about liberation or resistance ideology. It was about chemistry, precision, and the mathematics of survival. When asked about the October 1943 interrogation at Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse, he says simply, "The papers were good. I knew they would pass technical examination. The only question was whether I would pass psychological examination. I decided that the best strategy was to believe, completely and temporarily, that I was the person the papers described. It worked." Weber saw what he expected to see, someone anxious about being questioned but not guilty of forgery. The trick was not in lying. It was in becoming, for those 10 minutes, genuinely that other person. This technique, the temporary psychological transformation that allowed him to face Gestapo interrogation with calm eyes, was something Kaminsky used throughout his life whenever circumstances required deception. He describes it not as acting but as genuine psychological reconfiguration. A mental discipline that allowed him to contain contradictory identities simultaneously, chemist and forger, lawful resident and resistance member, Adolphe Kaminsky and Julien Adolphe Keller. This cognitive flexibility, more than any technical skill, was what saved his life and enabled him to continue saving others' lives. The legacy of Kaminsky's work extends beyond the specific people whose papers he forged. His techniques influenced post-war forgery operations. His chemical formulas were adopted by other networks. His psychological strategies for maintaining composure under interrogation were taught to agents and resistance members. The expertise he developed under desperate wartime conditions became a body of knowledge that saved lives in subsequent conflicts and crises. But Kaminsky himself remained uncomfortable with recognition or praise. When France finally awarded him the Legion of Honor in 2010, he accepted it without ceremony, explained to journalists that he had simply done work that needed doing, that anyone with his training would have done the same. This modesty was genuine but also revealing. Kaminsky never saw his forgery work as exceptional. He saw it as applied chemistry under constraints. The constraints happened to be Nazi occupation and the threat of genocide. But the fundamental work, matching inks and reproducing stamps, was just problem solving. What made Kaminsky exceptional was not his courage or his moral commitment but his inability to stop working while people needed help. Other forgers burned out after months of sustained stress. Kaminsky continued for decades. Other forgers made good papers but accepted failure rates of 5 or 10%. Kaminsky insisted on near perfection. Other forgers worked for ideological reasons and rested when they needed to. Kaminsky worked because the mathematics of survival required it and therefore could not rest. This psychological pattern, the compulsive commitment to technical perfection in service of saving lives, defined his entire existence. It made him invaluable during times of crisis. It also made normal civilian life difficult. He could not separate himself from the knowledge that his skills saved lives and therefore he had an obligation to use those skills whenever someone needed help. This burden was something he carried from age 18 until his death at 91. The fake stamp carved from linoleum in September 1943 survived. Kaminsky kept it for 70 years. It sits now in a museum in Paris, a piece of carved linoleum 2 inches square, the relief pattern showing German administrative markings reproduced with obsessive accuracy. Nothing about it looks exceptional. Just a simple tool created under pressure to solve a technical problem. That it saved thousands of lives was not because it was special but because Kaminsky understood that forgery is not about creativity or courage. It is about precision, patience, and the psychological discipline to maintain calm eyes while facing death.